involved in messing with Fiats for years, and that got us into Abarths and vintage race cars with Fiats and the like. So we've gotten pretty deep into this, got a lot of experience with it now. This tub or chassis here is the bottom of a Fiat 600. We've got this upside down so we can use it as a mule to develop our suspension. This chassis, or this tub, this is very similar to like a Volkswagen Bug pan. It's a similar kind of concept and build. This pan is used in the manufacture of a lot of the Abarths of the era, the late 50s. The Record Monza, the Double Bubble, several of them, and several coach builders put their alloy bodies on this pan. So this was the basis of an era of small Italian coach-built cars. Because of that, the design of this pan was meant as utilitarian and just a people mover car. These were never put together to be performance cars. They were put together to be inexpensive. Kind of like the Mini, the net result was it was kind of a fun car to drive, and because they were small and nimble, they had some handling characteristics that were fun, and that evolved into racing, then to Abarth using the pan and building little race cars out of these things. But the mechanics of it were not ideal by any means. The front suspension and the rear suspension, the steering, all of it was pretty dated technology, and it was done really inexpensively. So you could very quickly hit the limit on what this suspension system could tolerate. If you put more power to it, you quickly overwhelmed the brakes and quickly overwhelmed the suspension. I've raced one of these, and it was a lot of work to get that suspension and systems to function and not be just downright scary with the amount of power I was able to create with the motor. It's been a problem, or it's been a thing for many, many years. Right from the early 60s, Abarth did it. They made upgraded suspensions and tried to deal with some of the compromises that this tub produces. They had some really good ideas, and I used some of those ideas on my race car, and it does improve things. It does not solve things, it improves them. It makes them so it won't kill you. Short of that, they can be scary when pushed. So we have embarked on several projects using this pan. One is a real Abarth double bubble, which is this pan built by Abarth, bodied by Zagato, and that customer has us prepping this car for use in the La Carrera Pan America as a vintage entry. So we were forced at that point to have to upgrade it because there's just no way that car could survive that environment. Not enough power, not enough brake, not enough suspension, not enough anything. So we were already in the position where we had to do upgrades to that. So every project has steps and stages, and a lot of that is associated with a physical movement to a different area. This Jaguar is a 76 XJC. It's one that we've talked about in the past, but this is kind of a big step in this project. It's in the mechanical shop now, and it is ready to be disassembled. Similar to what we've done and shown in other cars, completely disassembled. Everything comes off, bare tub, and then it will be stripped down to bare metal. So that's where this one's at. This mechanical disassembly. Everything's off. And again, full documentation, photo and written documentation of what we're doing, taking notes, the whole thing. This is kind of a moment for this car. It's starting the next stage, and this is going to be pretty interesting. This car is quite healthy, never hit. This is an original 50,000 mile car. It's sat for a lot of years inside. It hasn't deteriorated, it's not rusty, it's actually quite healthy, but it's going to be restored. It's, in that regard, a very nice car to do. You're not digging rust out and all kinds of nastiness that hasn't been crashed or hit. Really pretty damn clean. It has been completely steam cleaned from one end to the other, so that as we take things apart, we're not dealing or minimizing, I guess, our exposure to grease and dirt and nastiness. All that's gone. The pressure washing doesn't hurt anything because it's all coming apart anyway. It just gets all the dirt and grime and nastiness out of our way. So looking forward to getting this one taken apart and stripped down to metal. So we have the Lancia Aurelia in the shop now, and it's just a crashed car at this point. We've got to get it stripped down to the bare tub before we can really assess it. Everything off of it, the suspension, the interior, just absolute down to the basics. So we can start getting measurements and look at this car from a reconstruction point of view. We're also pretty motivated to get all the paint, undercoatings, and really get it down also to bare metal. Again, to assess where we're at. The car, as bad as it looks, is not as out of shape as it would appear, at least by our initial measurements, and we won't really know 100% again until we get it stripped down. Start getting accurate measurements, but we're gonna have to move it somewhat. We're gonna have to do some corrective movements in the core tub, basically the A pillar, B pillar, C pillars. So we've got it at this point where we take it apart, strip down, and now we're gonna start moving things. Starting with the core structure. We've got to know that the suspension pickup points, the A, B, and C pillar locations in the tub are all square and relevant. So we're gonna have to start moving elements of this car, which gets a little tricky. We want to get in there because we want to know if we've got any other damage. If there's some rust damage in key structural areas, that's gonna mess with us when we're trying to move the car. In moving the tub or making changes in the car, there's a big assumption that all that is healthy other than it's moved or bent. If it's rusty or it's got other kind of damage, it's fractured or something like that, it's gonna mess with us. Kind of a catch-22 situation. We need good structure to move it, and if the structure is bad or rotted, we have to replace it, but it's out of shape. So it's a little bit tricky at that stage. That's what we're trying to get to, that moment, so we know how far we can go, how far we can push this thing without having to do any kind of constructive surgery. Once we're sure it's square, once we know we have a solid platform, then we can start moving metal and start working our way out. Only then will we get to where we'll actually start stripping panels off the car and working panels. None of this is particularly relevant until we have that core structure settled. The front end of this car took quite a hit, and it did bend the front suspension. It moved the pickup point on the front right. We know that. We think we can get that back where it goes. But again, that's secondary to the core structure of the tub itself. The horns or the frame rails forward of the tub on this car are actually fabricated. They're not stamped steel. They're actually fabricated out of pieces of steel individually. They're very handmade cars, like a lot of the Italian cars out of this era. As you take them apart, you can see how they were constructed. Very handmade, very pieces, as opposed to a production car having large stamped structures. These are often small structures welded together because that's the tooling and that's what they had available. So we're starting out by removing the interior and getting that out of the car. It exposes the floors. We want to see if there's any rust, damage, or previous repairs on the floors. Pretty core structure in a unibody like this. As we do that, we find things. We know we've already taken a lot of the trim off the front, and we have found reasonably thick Bondo in areas, which is usually a sign of kind of sculpting. It's a lazy way of doing metal work. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's rust or ugliness. It just means that whoever did the body work previously when this car was done in the past might have been a little bit lazy in doing metal work. So we're digging through that. We are seeing some signs of that. We're starting to see some signs of Bondo and some filler. We'll deal with that. Hopefully it's just kind of things out of shape and that we can work the metal back out. If we have to do metal replacement, that's how it goes. That will be done. We're not happy with what's out there for the compromised upgrades. It never really solved any of the issues. It never solved the incorrect geometry of either the front or the rear. So we decided to take it on and do it right. So the first thing we did is we brought in an engineer, a suspension engineer, and software. We actually laid out the suspension for correct geometry. That's the starting point. Everything else is the mechanics to make that happen. You have to get the correct geometry. So we did that. We established what the geometry would be in this platform. Then we've worked in from there to create the mechanicals to do that. And that, in the rear, that means relocating one of the suspension pickup points dramatically. In the front, it's just a wholesale change from what was on there previously. And that's kind of where we're at right now. The designs are done, the engineering's done, the designs are done, we've picked all our components. We are now using this pan upside down, this mule pan, if you will, to fit everything and do our final fabrication adjustments and changes. And we're remaking things several times until we get them to do what we want. But this is the layout of it. And so it results in some really clever and interesting looking suspension. We have used modern 4-pot calipers, front and rear, and we've got it all really compact, because one of the features of these cars in the era, which we really like, are these cool 13-inch magnesium rims. And we wanted all of this to be able to stuff inside that 13-inch rim. As we take this apart, we document it extensively. A lot of photos. We take a ton of photos that are just really mundane of just screws and rubber seals and pieces of metal, whatever, mechanical items. We document that with photos, digital photos, and we take a ton of them. Some of them we'll never use, and we know that, but all that's done is to give us a reference from where we started. Why something, if we get it all stripped down to zero and we're curious as to why something was done this way, often if you go back and look as to what was on it, what was mounted and screwed to it, you'll understand why they did that and what might be wrong about it. We will often document things that we don't ever use, but it's part of the story and part of the mystery of figuring it out. We then have to do research. We have to know what this car was, what is correct, what is not, what was modified. This car was previously restored, and that can cause a loss of information. So if that's been lost for good, we'll have to do the best we can to research it and recreate it.